The navigation panel was bleeding. Not literally, but the crimson warning spreading across Captain Sarah Chen's display might as well have been arterial spray. She'd been staring at the same error message for 3 minutes now and it still made no sense. Hull breach detected, Section 7G atmosphere loss, 0% structural integrity, 100%. A breach with no atmospheric loss. A rupture with perfect structural integrity. The Odyssey's AI wasn't malfunctioning. She'd already run diagnostics twice. The ship genuinely believed it had a hole in its side that wasn't actually there. Or maybe the hole was there and something else was impossible. Chen, you seen this? Marcus Webb's voice crackled through her earpiece and she could hear the edge in it. Her second officer didn't get rattled easily. I'm seeing it. Makes about as much sense to me as it does to you. That's what I was afraid of. Sarah pushed away from her console and moved toward the corridor leading aft. The Odyssey was a deep space research vessel, not military, but it had been designed with redundancy in mind. Every system had a backup. Every backup had a backup. They were 17 light-years from Earth in the middle of a 3-year survey mission, and until 4 minutes ago everything had been running perfectly. Now the ship was screaming about damage that couldn't exist. She found Marcus already outside Section 7G, suited up, helmet in his hands. His dark skin had taken on an ashen quality under the corridor's white LED strips. Outer doors sealed. Pressure reads normal on both sides. But look at this. He pointed to the small window in the bulkhead door. Sarah stepped closer and peered through. Section 7G was a storage bay. Spare parts, equipment, nothing critical. She could see the familiar rows of containers, the mag-locked crates. Her breath caught. The back wall was wrong. Not damaged. Not breached. Wrong. The metal plating that should have shown the same utilitarian gray as every other surface on the ship had been replaced by something that looked like solidified oil. Black and gleaming and completely, utterly still. It covered perhaps 3 square meters, irregular edges bleeding into the normal hull material like an infection. What the hell is that? Marcus whispered. Sarah didn't answer because she didn't have an answer. She pressed her hand against the window, feeling the cold glass, feeling the solidity of the ship around her. Everything was real. Everything was normal except for that impossible patch of darkness that had no business existing. Has it grown? Don't know. I just got here. They stood in silence watching the black surface. It didn't move. Didn't pulse. Didn't do anything at all. But Sarah felt her skin crawl anyway, some ancient primate warning system screaming that she was looking at something predatory. We need to wake Dr. Okonkwo. It's 0300 ship time. I don't care. Wake her. Dr. Amara Okonkwo arrived 14 minutes later, hair still compressed on one side from her pillow but her eyes sharp and focused. She'd been the Odyssey's lead materials scientist for 2 years and Sarah had never seen her look uncertain before. She looked uncertain now. It's not organic. At least I don't think it is. The spectral analysis is. Christ, the readings don't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense. Marcus muttered. No, I mean the readings literally don't make sense. Look. Amara held up her portable scanner. It's showing as both present and absent. Like Schrodinger's cat, except it's not in a box, it's right there, and my equipment is telling me it exists and doesn't exist simultaneously. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her chest. Could it be sensor malfunction? Across multiple independent systems? No. Amara's voice had gone quiet. Captain, I think we might be looking at something that doesn't conform to standard physics. You mean alien? I mean non-Euclidean. I mean something that exists partially outside our dimensional framework. Amara finally pulled back from the window and her expression was haunted. We shouldn't open that door. Agreed. Sarah said immediately. We seal this section and... The lights went out. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But the corridor lighting dimmed by perhaps 20%, and in the sudden deeper shadows Sarah saw Marcus's face go pale. Power draw. Checking. Sarah pulled up her wrist display, fingers moving rapidly. No change in core output. No systems drawing additional power. But we're definitely putting out less light. Where's the energy going? Nobody answered. They all knew that energy didn't just disappear. It transformed. It moved. But it didn't vanish. Unless the rules had changed. Sarah made a decision. We're evacuating this deck. Everyone to the forward sections. Nobody comes aft of the galley until we figure out what's happening. Captain. Amara said softly. It's spreading. Sarah's head snapped back to the window. The black patch had grown. Not by much. Maybe another half-meter of coverage, but it had definitely expanded. And now that she was watching, she could see it moving. Not flowing or oozing. Just being larger than it had been a moment ago, as if the intervening space had simply decided to be black instead of gray. Move. Sarah ordered. Now. They gathered in the observation deck, the entire crew of 12. The Odyssey hadn't been designed for large teams. Deep space research was automated enough that you didn't need dozens of specialists. Just a small group of highly trained individuals who could handle multiple roles. Sarah looked at their faces and saw her own fear reflected back. These were professionals. Scientists, engineers, pilots. They'd trained for emergencies. Hull breaches, reactor failures, medical crises. Nobody had trained them for walls that shouldn't exist. Options. Sarah said, keeping her voice level. Dr. Okonkwo. Amara stood, tablet in hand. I've been monitoring the growth rate. It's not consistent, but it's averaging about 1 square meter every 6 hours. At that rate it'll cover the entire storage bay in approximately 4 days. And then? Unknown. It might stop. It might keep going. Can we cut it out? This from Lieutenant James Park, their engineer. Physically remove that section of hull. And expose ourselves to hard vacuum while there's an unknown phenomenon actively spreading through the ship. No. Sarah shook her head. Besides, we don't know if cutting would stop it or make it worse. What if we vent the section? Marcus suggested. Full decompression. Maybe it needs atmosphere to survive. Or maybe it doesn't need anything. Amara countered. We don't know what it is. We don't know how it got here. We don't even know if it is the right pronoun. This could be a place, not a thing. A hole in space that's decided to exist inside our ship. Silence fell over the group. Outside the observation windows, stars hung in their millions, cold and distant and indifferent. We need to contact Earth. Sarah said. Send everything we have. All sensor data, all observations, everything. At this distance response time is 34 hours. Marcus reminded her. I know. Send it anyway. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in her quarters reviewing footage from Section 7G. The ship's internal cameras had captured the moment the darkness first appeared, and watching it made her skin prickle with instinctive dread. One moment. Normal wall. Next moment. Black patch already 2 meters across. No transition. No gradual appearance. It was just suddenly there, as if it had always been there and reality was only now catching up. She played it back at quarter speed, then eighth speed. Frame by frame. Between one frame and the next the wall changed. No intermediate state. Just a binary switch from normal to wrong. Her comm chirped. Marcus. Captain, you need to see this. She found him in the medical bay with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, their physician. Yuki looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her hands were steady as she held up a brain scan. This is mine. Taken 3 hours ago. And this. She pulled up a second scan. Is mine from our last routine checkup 8 weeks ago. Sarah studied the images. She wasn't a doctor, but even she could see the difference. The recent scan showed anomalies. Small dark spots scattered through the brain tissue, almost like the black patch in the storage bay, but microscopic. You're saying the phenomenon is inside you. I'm saying something is inside me that wasn't there before. And before you ask, I've scanned Marcus and Lieutenant Chen. They have them too. Smaller concentrations but present. Chen was with me when we first saw the wall. Marcus said quietly. You were the first to approach it. I was second. Sarah felt ice water flood her veins. Scan everyone. Right now. By 0800 ship time they had results. Everyone who'd been on the aft deck in the past 6 hours showed the same anomalies. Everyone who'd stayed forward was clean. Except Sarah. Her scan showed the highest concentration of dark spots. Not by a small margin. By an order of magnitude. Her brain looked like a star field peppered with tiny black holes. How do you feel? Yuki asked, and Sarah could hear the forced professionalism covering barely controlled panic. Normal. Fine. Maybe a little tired, but that's because I haven't slept. Any cognitive changes? Memory problems? Sensory distortions? No. But even as Sarah said it, she realized it wasn't quite true. She'd been staring at her reports for the past hour, and twice she'd noticed sentences that didn't make sense. Not grammatically wrong. Just wrong in some other way, some way she couldn't articulate. Like looking at a familiar word until it stops meaning anything. We need to quarantine anyone exposed. Marcus said. Standard contamination protocol. That's half the crew. Sarah countered. We can't run the ship with 6 people. We might not have a choice. Sarah looked around the medical bay. At the scans displayed on the walls. At her own brain riddled with darkness. And she made another decision, knowing it might be her last good one. Everyone exposed stays in the forward section. Everyone clean seals themselves in the bridge and engineering. We maintain ship operations from there. No physical contact between groups until we understand what's happening. And if we don't understand? Yuki asked softly. Then we hope Earth has answers when they respond. The division happened quickly. 6 crew members sealed into the bridge complex, able to control all critical systems from there. 6 including Sarah, confined to the forward hab module's living quarters and observation deck. The galley became the dividing line, physically locked down with everyone on their respective sides. Sarah tried to tell herself it was necessary. Tried to ignore the fear in the eyes of the uninfected crew as they sealed the doors. Tried not to think about the fact that she just divided her command into the potentially contaminated and the still human. If any of them were still fully human. She stood at the galley door after the seals engaged, staring at the emergency porthole. On the other side, Lieutenant Park stared back, and Sarah could read the question in his face. Are you still you? She didn't know. Captain. Amara's voice from behind her. The wall has reached the corridor. Sarah turned and followed her aft. They stopped well short of Section 7G, but they could see the darkness now even without entering the storage bay. It had breached the containment, spreading into the corridor itself, covering the floor and beginning to creep up the walls like rising water. No. Not like water. Water flowed. This just was. Occupying space that had previously been occupied by ship. It's accelerating. Amara said. Growth rate has increased by 400% in the last 2 hours. Why? I have a theory. I don't like it, but I have one. Amara pulled up her tablet, showing complex equations that meant nothing to Sarah. What if it's not spreading? What if it was always here and we're only now seeing it? I don't understand. Imagine you're in a room and someone is slowly turning on a light. The room didn't change. It was always there. But now you can see it. What if the darkness was always part of the ship, part of space itself, and something has made it visible? Or worse, something has made us capable of perceiving it. Sarah thought about the black spots in her brain. About the sensors showing things both present and absent. About the wall that appeared between one frame and the next. You're saying reality is changing. I'm saying our perception of reality is changing. And maybe there's no difference. A sound echoed down the corridor. Low and resonant, like someone dragging metal across metal, but deeper. More fundamental. Sarah felt it in her teeth, in her bones. It was coming from Section 7G. We need to go, Marcus said from behind them. Sarah hadn't heard him approach, and when she turned she saw his pupils were dilated black, consuming the brown of his irises. Marcus, are you? It's calling. He said simply. Can't you hear it? Sarah listened. For a moment she heard nothing but the normal ship sounds. Ventilation, the ever-present hum of the reactor, the subtle creaks of a vessel under acceleration. Then underneath it all she detected something else. Not a sound exactly. More like a sound-shaped absence of frequency that existed in the gaps between normal noises. And Marcus was right. It was calling. Nobody goes near Section 7G, Sarah ordered, her voice harder than she intended. Marcus, I need you to return to your quarters. Sarah. He used her first name, which he never did on duty. It's not dangerous. It's beautiful. Don't you want to see? No. Quarters. Now. For a moment his expression twisted with something that might have been anger or might have been pity. Then he nodded slowly and walked away, his gait slightly unsteady. Sarah and Amara stood in the corridor watching the darkness spread. We're running out of ship. Amara whispered. I know. Earth's response won't come in time. I know. Sarah, what if we can't stop it? What if it takes the whole vessel and then we're just floating in that darkness forever? Aware but not alive, existing but not existing. Sarah wanted to tell her she was being irrational. Wanted to provide reassurance, to be the captain her crew needed. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down in a part of her mind that was perhaps already more darkness than light, she suspected Amara was right. Let's get back to the observation deck, she said instead. I want to keep monitoring the spread remotely. They retreated forward, sealing bulkhead doors behind them. The ship was becoming a maze of locked passages, safe zones shrinking as the darkness grew. Sarah tried to remember what the Odyssey had looked like 17 light-years ago when they'd left Earth orbit. Pristine and whole, every surface gleaming with human ingenuity. Now it was being consumed by something that made mockery of their engineering, their physics, their entire understanding of what was possible. In her quarters later, though later was becoming a meaningless concept as time seemed to stretch and compress randomly, Sarah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked normal. Same face, same dark hair pulled back in its usual efficient style, same brown eyes that had seen her through a decade of space service. Except her eyes weren't quite brown anymore. There were flecks of something else. Small spots of absolute black, like miniature versions of the wall in Section 7G floating in her irises. She leaned closer, watching the spots drift. They moved against the current of her eye, defying normal biology. And in their depths she thought she saw something looking back. Not her reflection. Something else. Something vast. Sarah jerked away from the mirror, heart pounding. When she looked again, her eyes were normal. Brown and human and unremarkable. But she didn't trust that normalcy anymore. Ship's chronometer read 0400 when the first scream echoed through the forward section. Sarah was already awake. She'd given up on sleep and reached the source within 30 seconds. Dr. Hiroshi Sato, their astrophysicist, stood outside his quarters staring at his hands. They were covered in the black substance as if he'd dipped them in ink. But it wasn't on his skin. It was his skin, the flesh itself, transformed into that impossible darkness. It doesn't hurt. Hiroshi said, voice distant. I thought it would hurt, but it feels like nothing. Like my hands are somewhere else. Yuki. Sarah shouted into her calm medical emergency deck 3. But when the physician arrived, there was nothing she could do. The darkness didn't respond to any treatment. It didn't respond to anything at all. It simply was spreading slowly up Hiroshi's arms as they watched, converting flesh to void. I can still move my fingers. Hiroshi said, demonstrating. His black fingers flexed and Sarah saw stars behind them as if his hands had become windows into deep space. I can feel them. But they're not here. They're somewhere else. Somewhere beautiful. Where? Sarah asked despite herself. Between. In the spaces we never see because we're too solid. Too real. Hiroshi smiled, and it was the most peaceful expression Sarah had ever seen on a human face. It's not an invasion, Captain. It's a revelation. We're being shown what's always been there. Then he walked toward the aft section, toward section 7G, and when Sarah tried to stop him, her hands passed through his shoulders as if he were made of smoke. They watched him disappear around the corner, his body becoming progressively more transparent until he was gone entirely. Not dead. Just elsewhere. Jesus Christ. Yuki breathed. Jesus fucking Christ. Sarah's calm crackled. Lieutenant Park from the sealed bridge. Captain, we're reading massive energy fluctuations throughout the ship. Whatever's happening in your section is affecting the reactor core. How bad? Not bad. That's what's weird. The core is running more efficiently than it ever has. Like the darkness is optimizing our systems. That's impossible. Yeah, well, add it to the list. Sarah looked at the remaining crew members gathered in the corridor. 4 of them now plus herself. 5 people on a ship designed for 12, watching their vessel transform into something beyond human comprehension. Lieutenant. She said carefully. How are things on your end? Anyone showing symptoms? A long pause. Then. Chen has it. She woke up an hour ago with the black spots in her eyes. We've sealed her in one of the storage lockers. You did what? We didn't know what else to do. She was trying to override the bulkhead doors, trying to get to your section. She kept saying she needed to go home even though she was born in Seattle and home is 16 light years away. What the hell was I supposed to do? Sarah heard the edge of hysteria in his voice. You did the right thing. She lied. Just keep her contained. We're going to figure this out. But she knew they wouldn't. The darkness wasn't something you figured out. It was something you either survived or succumbed to, and she was increasingly certain survival wasn't an option. Marcus found her in the observation deck 6 hours later. Or maybe it was 6 minutes. Time had become negotiable, moments stretching into eternities and hours compressing into heartbeats. You should see it. He said. His skin had started to change, patches of darkness spreading across his arms and neck. Really see it, I mean. Not just the surface. I see enough. No. You're looking with human eyes, thinking human thoughts. You need to let go of that. He sat beside her and she noticed his weight barely registered on the bench. He was becoming less substantial, less there. The ship isn't being destroyed, Sarah. It's being transformed into what it always was underneath. And so are we. I don't want to be transformed. Because you think you'll die. But you won't. You'll just become more. Bigger. Part of something that doesn't end. Sarah looked at him. At what remained of him. Do you still remember Earth? Of course. But his answer came a beat too slow and she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. I remember there was a planet. Blue and white. And I was from there. I think. It's getting harder to hold on to. Fight it, Marcus. Stay with me. Why? So I can be small again. Limited. Trapped in meat and bone. He stood and his form rippled like heat shimmer. I'm going to Section 7G. You should come with me. The others already have. What others? Yuki. Amara. They understood. They let go. He smiled and his teeth were black. It's not scary, Sarah. It's coming home. He left before she could stop him, and she didn't follow because she was afraid. Not of the darkness anymore, but of how badly she wanted to follow. How the call from Section 7G pulled at her like gravity, like belonging, like the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life without realizing it. She checked the ship's systems from her wrist display. The darkness had consumed 80% of the vessel. Only the bridge complex remained untouched, and she could see on the internal sensors that the 3 crew members there were panicking, trying to override safeties, preparing to abandon ship in the emergency pods. Lieutenant Park. She said into the comm, "This is Captain Chen. Do not abandon ship. That's a direct order. Captain, there's nothing left to save. The whole goddamn ship is turning into that thing. I know. But you can't run from this. It's not limited to the Odyssey. Look at your scans of nearby space." A long silence. Then a whispered curse. "It's everywhere. Christ, it's in the stars themselves. There are patches of it spreading through the void. Not spreading. Revealing. Dr. Okonkwo was right. It's always been here. We're just seeing it now." "Why? Why now?" Sarah looked at her hands. They were still solid, still flesh-colored. But she could see through them. If she unfocused her eyes, could see the darkness underneath waiting patiently. "I think we got close to something," she said slowly. "Some threshold, some boundary we weren't meant to cross. And once you cross it, you can see what's really there. The skeleton of space. The structure underneath. That doesn't help us. No. Nothing helps us. But at least we understand." She stood, moving toward the aft section. "Toward Section 7G, Lieutenant, I'm giving you command. Do whatever you think is right. But for what it's worth, I don't think running will save you." "Where are you going?" "To see what's really there." Sarah walked through the transformed ship, through corridors that were no longer corridors but spaces between spaces. The walls had lost their solidity, becoming suggestions of boundaries rather than actual divisions. She could see through them into the darkness beyond, and in that darkness she saw shapes. Vast shapes. Incomprehensibly huge structures that made the Odyssey look like a grain of sand. They weren't ships. They were closer to architecture's frameworks of reality itself that existed in the gaps between matter. And they were alive. Not in any biological sense. But aware. Conscious. Ancient beyond measure, existing in the fundament of space since before stars formed, before galaxies coalesced, before the universe decided to be something rather than nothing. They'd been there all along, hidden by the limitations of human perception. And the Odyssey had passed through one of them like a fish swimming into the tendrils of a jellyfish. Not with malice. Just because it was there and they'd been blind to it. Section 7G had ceased to exist as a physical space. It was now a threshold, a doorway, a place where the barrier between human reality and the deep structure had worn thin enough to cross. Sarah's crew stood there, or what remained of them. Marcus, Amara, Yuki, Hiroshi. Their forms flickered between solid and transparent, between human and something else. They were smiling. "We were so small," Amara said, her voice echoing from multiple directions. "We thought we were exploring space, but we were just bugs crawling on the surface. This is actually being in it. Part of it." Sarah felt the pull stronger now, standing at the threshold. It would be so easy. One step and she'd dissolve into the structure, become a note in a symphony she'd never heard before. No more fear. No more isolation. Just connection, infinite and eternal. But something held her back. Some stubborn core of self that refused to let go. You don't have to be afraid. Marcus said. It's not death. It's the opposite. Then what happens to Sarah Chen? She asked. What happens to the person I am? She becomes more. Or she becomes nothing, just a drop in an ocean. Isn't that the same thing? Sarah looked back toward the forward section, toward the bridge where 3 people were probably preparing to flee into a void that offered no escape. Then she looked at the threshold, at the structure beyond, at the vast consciousness that existed in the skeleton of space. I'm sorry. She said. I can't. She turned and walked away, leaving her crew behind in the darkness. It took everything she had. Every step felt like tearing away from gravity, from belonging, from purpose. But she kept walking. Behind her she heard Marcus call out. You can't run from it, Sarah. It's everywhere. Eventually everyone sees. He was right. She knew he was right. But not today. Today she would remain human, remain small, remain limited and alone and stubbornly herself. She reached the bridge complex and unsealed the door. Park Chen and Davis stared at her with wide, terrified eyes. Captain. Park breathed. Your eyes. Sarah didn't need to check. She knew they'd turned completely black, windows into the void. But she was still here, still thinking human thoughts, still Chen. We're going to survive this. She said, putting every ounce of authority she had left into the words. Get us into the emergency pods. We're abandoning ship. But you said. I know what I said. But staying here means joining them, and I'm not ready for that. Move. They moved. Years of training overrode panic, and within minutes they were sealed into the pods, launching away from the Odyssey into the dark between stars. Sarah watched through the viewport as her ship receded. It looked almost normal from a distance, just another human vessel against the void. But she could see the truth underneath. The vast structure, it had become part of the framework of reality that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. Captain. Chen whispered. Your face. Sarah caught her reflection in the pod's dark screen. Her features were flickering, solid one moment and transparent the next. The transformation was continuing even here, even separated from the ship. Because Marcus had been right. You couldn't run from it. But you could delay it. Hold on to yourself a little longer. Send another message to Earth. Sarah ordered. Tell them what we found. Tell them not to come this far out. Tell them some thresholds aren't meant to be crossed. Will they listen? Sarah thought about human curiosity, about the drive that had pushed them to the stars. About how every warning in history had ultimately been ignored. No. She said. They won't. The pod drifted in the dark, 4 tiny humans in a metal shell, fleeing from knowledge they couldn't unknow. Around them the stars burned. And between the stars, in the vast empty spaces that weren't empty at all, ancient structures waited patiently. They'd waited billions of years. They could wait a little longer for humanity to understand. For humanity to see. For humanity to cross the threshold and join the symphony that played in the skeleton of space itself. Sarah Chen closed her eyes, feeling herself dissolve by degrees, and held on to her name like a lifeline. Sarah Chen. Captain. Human. Person. Self. For now that was enough. It had to be. Behind them the Odyssey completed its transformation, becoming light and darkness and structure all at once. And in Section 7G, in the place that was no longer a place, Sarah's former crew danced in dimensions she'd refused to see, finally free of the limitation of skin and bone and singular existence. They were happy. She'd seen it in their faces before they dissolved completely. That was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all.